Hello, people. Happy Sunday. I'm really excited for this, and I'm sure you guys are too. Obviously, since I started doing live streams and talking about the little season, everyone has said, you need to have Jason Jack on. And I said, I know, I do need to have him on. And well, that day is finally here. Welcome to the show, Jason. How you doing?
I'm great. How about you?
I'm doing awesome. Well, like I said, that might be kind of a half truth. I would say I was being a little bit rough today, but I'm excited because this has been one of the conversations that going around talking about all the people who are talking about the short season and you being kind of like the most kind of polished as far as like putting videos together with like in with a plan, unlike myself who kind of just flies by the seat of my pants. Like I really wanted to talk to you, because you kind of have a nice flow of your connection. So
Yeah,
I'm excited.
I definitely feel more comfortable presenting videos that I can edit and stop and start. So this is new territory for me. But like I told you a few weeks ago, I just wanted to be able to accumulate as much knowledge as I could. So it'd be worth you having me on. And also, I promised that I would do a show with Luke and Renee, which I did this past Friday.
Hmm.
And I said that they would be the first ones, and so I just wanted to hold my word for that. So now that we've done that, it's full speed ahead.
Yeah, I know everybody in the community is excited because we have been, obviously me and Paul have talked like 100 times in the past year. And not that I've, not that's not good, but it's just that I know that you should have Madeline on, you should have Culticon on, you should have, Rev on, you should. And I'm like, yeah, I should have all of them on, because I mean, my goal is to do this more. And I think that the more we can learn from each other, the more we're going to get further. And yeah, so
Right.
I actually appreciated the fact that the reason you didn't want to come on a while back is because you were still trying to accumulate some information so you could share it. So that's good. So I mean, obviously, yeah, we're in a good place now, and I think we have put a lot of pieces together. So yeah, this is exciting. But yeah, why don't you take us through your kind of process? Because I know a little bit of your background, how you started making videos years ago, and you were making even futurism videos, and now you obviously do not make futurism videos. So, but yeah, why don't you tell us your story?
Yeah, it started like I told you, well over a decade ago, and I was starting my career. I had gone through residency, medical school and residency, and started a family. Had two kids, and I remember taking a personal, like, see how good your life is doing. Have you hit all your goals? And career was doing well, family was doing well, and then the spiritual was like, oh my gosh, I just flunked that. And I grew up in a church and grew up reading the Bible, but had gotten away from it for a while. But God was patient and long suffering with me. And back about over a decade ago, after that realization, I got into the word and basically just told God, I don't care what you show me. I just want to know the truth, and just started reading it and trusting his word. And here we are, over a decade later. But it started with a book that I wrote that was published in 2016 called In Spirit and Truth, a seeker's path of Jesus Christ. And after publishing that, that's when I started my YouTube channel. And basically, I was just going to make a few videos to talk about each chapter of the book, and that be it. But then I started getting comments and asking questions. So I'm like, well, I'll make a video about that. And then that led one thing to another. And then these realizations, these revelations started coming to me over the past decade. Like I told you, you know, reading Genesis 6 and seeing the sons of God, and it just hit me. Oh my gosh, this is talking about angels. But then I wrestled with that for a while and even went back to the Sethak view for a while. And I think God allowed me to really wrestle with that before coming back around to understanding that concept.
Why do you
Another
think?
thing was,
Why do you think you
yeah,
wanted to go? Why do you think you went back, started to go backwards on that
yeah, and I
view?
know you did a huge production, right, with
Yeah,
Brian?
yeah. Me and
Yeah,
Brian did, yeah, Ancient Angels,
yeah,
and so
with
that,
Ancient
yeah,
Angels.
yeah. I want to stick on that point for just a second because that was one of the things where, first of all, the thing you said was awesome about like that. I don't care what's true, God, I just want you to reveal it to me. And because I feel like that's how my journey started too. It's like I'm just going to read this Bible and I'm going to
Yeah,
believe it.
right.
And so show me things. And then so Genesis 6 one is one of the first big revelations I got. And I was just like, how did I miss that? But yeah, how did you what do you think made you want to say, "Oh, maybe this is just the sons of Seth?"
I I think it was just humbling myself and looking at scripture and just reading it over and over and allowing the spirit to guide me into truth. And I just think that sometimes God will just hit you over the head and say, this is the truth, and other times He allows you to wrestle with it. Like for biblical cosmology, I from a science background. My major was biology, went to med school, surgeon, and so I was just indoctrinated with the sciences all my life.
Of course. Yeah.
And then I got to biblical cosmology and I read it for the Bible for what it was. I'm like, of course, this is true. The spinning ball, that's not true.
Mhm.
And I had no problems with that. And then going forward from there, I started seeing the deception in this world. And that was a big thing. And I started making videos about all the deception in this world. And then the time manipulation. And that led to my first video over 6 years ago about the little season. And I had no dots connected at the time when discussing the little season, but I was questioning, could we be in it? And I was looking at it from a addition of 1,000 years, just something very simple where the
Mhm.
I and the J was added, and that was for Jesus or Jesus, and it was really year of the Lord Jesus 700 instead of
Right.
1700.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I started looking at that and then looked at that for a while, made several videos on that, but then um, came back around and wanted to look at futurism one more time. And I think again, God allowed me to wrestle with that and put me back um, in frame of mind to look at that one last time and really study it out, and even made a few videos. If you look at my channel, there's a whole of 2 or 3 years where I was making a few futurist videos, but they were not good.
Mhm.
I just saw there were so many holes in the eschatology. And so I just took it all down. And then a couple years ago, I came back around to this.
Well,
And
that's
here we
good.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that yeah, I mean, it sounds like that obviously the beats you were hitting are kind of like the ones that I did because I feel like when I woke up in 2020, I thought, well, obviously this is the end times now. They've been telling me this whole time. Like again, I was talking with Brian a week ago about how like that Left Behind series. It's like that's really put its imprint on my generation. So we're always being like, oh, what's the mark of the beast? What's this? What's that? So when 2020 happened, you're like, yeah, this sounds like the
Yeah.
beginning of that movie. So then of course, knowing that I believe the Bible and I'm like, I want to prove to people that they need to wake up because Jesus is coming back. And so that's basically how my channel started. And then I started to show like, yeah, kind of more uncovering lies and darkness. And I thought it was like because I liked conspiracies, but I was thinking like this is the Antichrist conspiracy. So it was like, it's not like every day I talked about the end times, but in my back of my mind, I was like, oh, I know it is. And so if I show more lies in the things we've been taught, then it'll reveal what the plan is. And so I guess that's maybe where you and I basically got around to the short season because discover Genesis 6, discover biblical cosmology. And then it's like, yeah, if you're faithful reading the scriptures, you're just like, there's no getting around it when people do point out to you that Jesus is talking about a very specific generation, a very specific time is what Daniel's talking about. It all happens then. So then, yeah, then when people tell you about the mud flood and Tataria and the old world, and you're like, yeah, this is a really weird gap in our history. And yeah, the timeline manipulation. So I feel like it's really hard not to consider this when
Right.
you have learned the lie about the shape of the earth, the lie about Nephilim, giants, all that stuff, and then also the timeline. I think yeah, it becomes undeniable that something is up.
Yeah. And not everybody um, believes in biblical cosmology, that understands the little season eschatology, and that's okay. Everybody is on their own journey to seeking truth, and I just tell, all my commenters to seek truth in all things, and God's going to guide you to the truth eventually, I think. So, yeah, so over the past year or two, just looking at scriptures, and what's amazing to me, and I was talking to you, JT, the other day about this, is that the church has never presented this as an end times option for
Yeah.
study in eschatology. We have the book of Revelation, we have the preterist and the futurist view, the historicist, the idealist, but not this view. And I think this is the most sound from a scriptural standpoint, trusting Jesus' words, the prophets' words, taking the 1,000 years literally, from a chronology standpoint, reading it from chapter 1 to chapter 22. It's the most sound, basic way to reading the book of Revelation, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it is weird because I can't remember who. Oh, I think what I was doing, I was listening to somebody debunking the little season, and they were commenting that it was a new eschatology. And I said, that might be the first thing they said that I agreed with. So I was like, yeah, that's kind of weird though, isn't it? That this would be brand new. Because why wouldn't it be? Because it seems weird to me that you have in preterism, you have full preterism, which obviously everything's fulfilled. So then you have to take a lot of license with, was this an allegory? Was this part of the book of Revelation? Was this supposed to be a literal physical act, or was this symbolic and spiritual? So then partial preterists would say, well, I believe that all the things in 70 AD happened, but I also believe that Jesus is probably going to come back in a different kind of way at some point. And also they obviously agree with full preterists in some ways, where they can easily just say anything that doesn't quite fit what they believe, or they don't have historical proof for it, they'll just say allegory,
Right.
symbolic. And so it seems weird to me that there's not a camp of preterists that would say, no, I believe the 1,000 years is literal. So if it was literal, where would that put us? And I mean that,
Right.
and I know that people hate that term in this community, but I would say that if preterist literally means that past fulfillment of prophecy, I mean that kind of does. I mean that's why I said people are going to call us that. They're going to call us that. But yeah, so that's what the little season people would be that we're taking this literal because the Bible says more than one time that there's 1,000 years, the devil's bound during this time. And that's the thing that always like it makes no sense to me when people say, "Oh, well, millennium could mean any number of things. It could be an indefinite amount of time." I'm like, "But it's a specific amount of time because something happens during that time. The devil is put in a pit, so he can't deceive, and then he's let out." So without, I mean, to me, the easiest way to do it is just believe what it says. It was 1,000 years.
Right.
He was in a pit. Now he's not. And so if you believe that, even if you believe the mainstream chronology, you'd say, well, it's been about 2,000 years since Jesus. So the 1,000 years is over,
Right.
and now we're here. So where is here though?
Yeah. So, and the 1,000 years it has an expiration date. And when you read Revelation 20, it says after the 1,000 years has expired. And so, and it's mentioned 6 times in Revelation 20, whereas the 3.5 years, the 1260 days, the times
Hmm.
dividing of time, that's mentioned 5 times in the book of Revelation. Yet everybody takes that as literal, a literal 3.5 years. But you have a time stamp mentioned 6 times in Revelation 20, and you have a lot of people that want to take it figurative. And so, but like you said, the church has never given an option for this, because if you look at Jesus' words, the prophets, and you see the imminency of his return, and that the judgments on the beast and the harlot were taking place that generation, you had no other choice but to be a preterist, partial preterist, and then go an amillennial or postmillennial standpoint, because there was no 1,000 year literal. If you wanted to take the 1,000 years literally and had that viewpoint, there was no teaching of that in the church. And if you look at it the opposite way, if you understood that the 1,000 years was literal and that it came after the second coming of Jesus Christ, just like it reads in the book of Revelation, then you have nowhere to go when you get to the prophecies of Jesus and the prophets saying that his return was imminent and those judgments were imminent for that generation. So you had to choose either futurism or some type of partial preterism. There's no other choices. It's a lie of omission, I think, that the church has done over the past couple hundred years during the little season.
Yeah, correct. And so yeah, I brought up this, and I thought this was something I had really had any heard anyone say before. I know we actually talked like 2 weeks ago, and I just started to think about that my friend from postmodern theology, Matt, he when he was on my podcast, he mentioned how like the historical church, like by and large, has been amillennialist. But I said I think that, and the part that kind of was making me laugh a little bit was that the people that are coming against us, they think that like there's only one true interpretation that's possible, and that's futurism. But and then they try to push us into preterism. But I thought the interesting part is when I learned about both those doctrines or eschatologies were introduced kind of like in the 1700 time range.
Right.
And so amillennialist is the most popular, even still today. And the reason why the futurists, especially like the left behind crowd, they think that they're the only ones talking about it because if you're a millennialist, you're not as worried about the book of Revelation, right? So they don't go over and tell you about all their end times eschatology because in their mind, there's a kingdom of heaven, they're connected to it. We'll all experience it fully when we go to heaven. So, but I thought was interesting is that if you had the earliest church fathers, if you look this up, the very earliest ones, they were premillennialists. And then at a certain point, probably around mid antiquity, they were all amillennialists. And I thought, you know what, that's really interesting. So amillennialists like dominated for like 1,000 years. And so then you have afterwards that you had certain churches, like I think the Protestants, the Orthodox Church, the Catholics, were all teaching amillennialism. Again, it wasn't until like around 1700 that they start teaching either premillennialists or preterism. So to me, it's almost like, is it possible that, yeah, right around the 1700 range, which kind of we're all been kind of in this community been talking about, what if that's when Satan was loosed? And then so the church had just took the tradition of teaching amillennialism without really recognizing maybe the spiritual significance of what shifted in the world and then what came next. Because I mean, you could imagine that if you weren't really spiritually attuned, you didn't know, like these people I can forgive because they didn't have the time clock of when the millennial started, so they wouldn't know exactly when it was going to finish. And they continue to teach that they being in the millennial reign without recognizing what actually just changed, like the massive spiritual shift that could have happened in 1776, for instance.
Yeah, and I think the Catholic Church has usurped a lot of the millennial kingdom and put itself into that. And that includes the cathedrals, that includes the church fathers, the
Hmm.
early church fathers. I think a lot of early church fathers' writing have been hijacked by uh, Catholicism and the teachings of that. And truly, that those saints that you see on St. Peter's Basilica and the church fathers that are published were truly the glorified saints in the millennial kingdom. And maybe they knew that they were obviously in the millennial kingdom, this literal 1,000 years. But after the little season, the Catholic Church just put an A on the millennial and made it a mill.
Yeah, no, I
And
mean,
retrospectively went back and said, okay, this is what the church fathers taught. But truly, they were the glorified saints that knew they were in the millennial kingdom.
yeah, that's something to consider. I think what's interesting, and I think that the main reason why most people probably would still fall into the the premillennialism camp is because you have that. like that part of the book of Revelation, if you like if your idea is already that we're premillennialists, you're really only focusing on the very beginning of the book of Revelation, right? Because you just know once it goes crazy, it's like, I mean, I just know how I don't really know exactly how it's all going to work, but I know that. So you're really more focused on the Antichrist, right? Because that's what everyone, I mean, that's obviously what all premillennialists are focused on. So it's almost like the idea of like when you get to Revelation chapter 20, and I'm myself was guilty of this. I don't even know what it's even talking about. Like it's really just hard to understand. It's really vague. So I think that that's where I kind of give people some slack because I think a lot of people don't know, and I think the people who've been trying to critique us, they think the millennial reign after the millennial reign, they think there's a new heaven and a new earth, no more sea. They think there's going to be no tears. It's like I see a lot of people conflate like all the things being fulfilled
Yes.
with the little season. But there's really not much written about the little season, so it's really kind of hard to know exactly what like applies to us or why would anyone think that they were in that time because there's really
Right.
nothing to identify what that time looks like.
But the church doesn't teach it either, what is in the Bible, and I think this eschatology has more fruit in quality and quantity than any other eschatology I've studied ever. And basically, we're just further down. We believe the futurist viewpoint. We just think we're further down the timeline. We think what they think is coming has already passed, and we're just further down the timeline, prior to the great white throne judgment.
Without question. It's interesting to even think about it. Let's just say we're wrong, right? Let's just say that we're not in the little season. It's it almost seems like that even if we weren't, wouldn't it be worth talking about like what could happen during this little season? Because there's going to be people in a little season if it's not us, right? So isn't it kind of weird that the church has never really written about what it's supposed to be like?
Yeah, the church doesn't, they just completely dismiss it. They don't teach about it, and they never even consider that there's going to be people and generations within this era after the millennial kingdom who have been deceived into believing that there hadn't been a millennial kingdom that had preceded them, because otherwise they know exactly where they were in the timeline, and they wouldn't be apt to go up and surround the camp of the saints in the beloved city and fight with God, if something like that should show up. And so, first of all, it's going to take time for those generations to be deceived about the past, and that the past has been hidden, so they don't know where they are in the biblical prophetic timeline. And then the second thing is for enough time, enough people, enough technology to get on board to actually have a chance to fight against God.
Yeah, there's something about that too, and I was thinking about that, and I think the real reason I remember this, and I said this is I don't know how many times, probably when I first started reading my Bible again, I was definitely one of those people who, when I got to Revelation 20, I used to ask people about that. What do you think that even means? That like why would the God why would God just put the devil in a pit and not just throw him in the lake of fire too? And then I was thinking like, so how is he going to deceive everyone afterwards? I thought it's really weird. I mean, yeah, I remember really thinking like that's something where we respect our enemy, not respect in that kind of, the kind we normal way, but like almost like there's a healthy respect for an adversary that is this crafty. Because the way I saw it, the way the predator, the futurists teach it, is that Jesus is going to be reigning where Bibi Netanyahu is right now. Right. It's
Right.
like, so everyone will see him there and everything will be as like in their minds, it'll be just like this certain way. And so, yeah, it makes no sense to me that the devil could deceive the rest of the world during that time. And also, what you said is that it makes sense to me that if that's incorrect, which I now think it is, I think that it would take more than one generation to deceive everybody. Because yeah, you have to kind of move away from that enough where the lie can be repeated over and over again. what is that? Is that Yuri Bezmenov who did that? Was ex KGB guy, and he talked about how disillusionment of and re-indoctrination of like societies and how long each times it takes
Mhm.
demoralization and all the different phases in order to basically co-opt a whole population's brains.
Right.
Yeah, like so some people, I think one of these guys who was trying to debunk the little season, he was saying it was only one generation. And you're thinking like, unless the devil literally casts a spell on people, I don't think you could do it in one generation
You
because
can't.
they all saw.
Right.
I
But
mean,
the church doesn't even consider that, to put themselves in that. That's how much deception I think, has occurred, and that's another reason I think that we're in the little season. It says in Revelation 23 that Satan must be loose. So there's a reason. There's a good reason in God's eyes, and maybe we can talk about that later when we get into the um, next part of the show.
yeah, okay. So where did you want to go next? Because like I said, I try to tell people, I said I want to give Jason the floor since he's kind of been the people they see me enough. so so what direction do you want to take it in? You got something specific you wanted to talk about?
Well, I know you made a nice little Statue of Liberty thumbnail.
Oh
So
yeah. Mhm.
yeah, and I think that's what people want to talk about the little season when it began. And I think that this is the next thing over the next year or so that hopefully we'll start understanding a lot more and more be revealed about this transitional time specifically between the end of the millennial kingdom and the beginning of the little season, how that all went down, when it happened, how it occurred, things like that.
Yeah. So it is interesting the connection a lot of people have made between 1776 and then we have the most famous statue in America is the Statue of Liberty. And when you see there's that famous statue of or there is a famous painting of Lucifer leading his horde of hell, into battle. And then you have also a really famous statue I think of Lucifer from like the 1850s, right? Like pretty contemporary.
Hmm.
It's like the one where he's kind of like sunken in a little bit, and you can see he's got a chain around his ankle. So then you have the Statue of Liberty with a broken chain around her ankle or his ankle, however you want to say it. And Brian asked a good question again because I was saying the more I think about that idea of that the little season started with a whisper. It was not. It didn't go off with fireworks right away. I think the fireworks came afterwards that lead into like the revolutions and all the things that happened, the great fires. But he was saying like that. I wonder how many people knew like when it happened, like exactly when it happened. If there was these really spiritually in tune people probably knew. And then it's like you could only imagine if somebody kind of had some of the knowledge that we have about yeah that painting, the other Lucifer statue, and they see that thing being put up, and yeah, Brian's like, that's Apollo. That's
Yeah,
Helios.
right,
This is the sun god being put up there. What? It's got a broken chain around its ankle. There, you can imagine like the horror of like, what does this mean?
right.
And then they would know. I mean, I do think I was just getting those vibes. Like, what if it was like that?
Yeah, I think it goes all the way back to Babylonian times with Shamash worship and then
Hmm.
Mithras and goes into Apollo. And I believe, Nebuchadnezzar's image that he's after his dream in Daniel 2, which is very important. That prophecy that we can talk about maybe briefly, but in Daniel 3, he actually set up an image in Shinar, and I believe it looked like the Statue of Liberty. We have all the church shows the Babylonian kind of looking statue of the head of
Oh,
brass,
right.
and I think it was the Statue of Liberty, and I think that's what was set up in the temple.
Well, you have that. I know the real famous one that I remember. I made a connection with it. In one of my old videos was about. It was called the Colossus of Rhodes,
Hmm.
and so I think that was the statue of Helios, and it's literally, well, it's supposedly the exact same height as the Statue of Liberty. And so the main difference is this one has got a robe that's open, so you can see there's no question that it's a man. Let's just put it that way.
Right.
Yeah, and it's Helios in this harbor, and I think ancient Greece. And so then you have this statue. Yeah, it's got like the sun thing, like the sun, the beams of light kind of in the crown, and you have the same thing with Shamash. And yeah, that it is sort of interesting because the Babylonian, I guess the way we're shown them, yeah, they always have those beards, right? They have the
Right.
long beards. But I want to say that Samash is from kind of in that same kind of region, and he didn't have a beard. I think
No,
it's because I think it's because Apollo is depicted as like being young, right? Because he
right.
was like one of the gods of like youth and virility.
Yeah, and Shamash actually has a crown just like the Statue of Liberty. It
Hmm.
looks just like the Statue of Liberty, and the image of the beast, I think, looked just like the Statue of Liberty. And that was in honor of the beast. Um, when the false prophet said to worship the beast and set the image up. And I think that now this is the same type of reverence by the Luciferians after Satan's little season has began, showing us again, uh, possibly where, and we can talk about that. Satan has dwelt over the last little bit of time, and because I was talking to a commenter, and one of the reasons I love making videos is because all the comments, and there's a lot of good comments and people that don't have channels. And one of the comments was said, and it was in reference to 1776 and as a possible starting date for Satan's little season. And I've always kind of thought that, and I've looked at it, from a when the destruction of Jerusalem and fall of Rome, if you look at the destruction of Jerusalem and fall of Rome happening concurrently, the feet of iron and miry clay being destroyed together, and then the stone was Jesus Christ, and the mountain that filled the whole earth afterwards was that's the millennial kingdom, you know. Um, but our history books teach that it's 476 AD, the fall of Rome, and there's 400 years or so difference. But I believe they occurred concurrently. So that was 76 AD. And I use 76 AD because of the 2300 days in Daniel. And so when the image was set up prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, it took 2300 days, which is just over 6 years, before the sanctuary was cleansed. And I think that was at the destruction of the Roman Empire and the house of Israel in Jerusalem. So that would take us to 76 AD. And if the millennial kingdom was truly 1,000 years, which we all believe, that would take us to 1076. And then with Gunnar Heinzen and other people's research, these secular historians that have given their whole life's work to looking at this chronology manipulation, I don't think we should discount, dozens and dozens of secular researchers who have shown the addition of time throughout the Dark Ages and other periods in our history. With Gunnar Heinzen looking at that 700 years, then adding that to 1076 brings us to 1776. And there's a lot of things that occurred at that time, right? There's the Declaration of Independence. There's all these revolutions that began. There's Anno Lucis, the Year of Light, which was began in 1776 by Freemasons. The Illuminati was began in 1776. So I think it's a good starting date.
Yeah, no, actually, I thought it was really interesting the Gunnar Heinzen research where he was kind of saying that he believed that Jesus was in the 8th century. So, I mean, from our perspective, that would be somewhere in the 700s.
Right.
And so it does line up pretty nicely when you think about it like that, because that was probably the most amazing thing about the Gunnar Heinzen stuff was that it was almost like that he just proved our best guesses about these things, our best theories, that like it lined up literally like it was like a glove over a hand. I was like, yeah, because it was like this works perfectly. Jesus being in the 700s, and then you have 1,000 years. Now we're in the 1776 range, 1800s when like all the millennial reign possibly ended. Yeah, it's like it's really hard to understand how that's that like I guess we had no idea how close we were really on to like what could possibly be true.
And what else is interesting about Gunnar Heinzen's research is what you and Paul presented in three parts, that conference in Toronto, Canada back in 2016, where he used stratigraphy and he showed that this 700-year period, it wasn't three separate events divided by 300 years and 400 years, but it was all at once. And that was, another reason that he concluded that 700 years have been added to the timeline. But then I looked at that and I'm like, okay, well, how about, is the times and dividing of time a foreshadowing of that? The addition of time and then dividing it in 300 and 400 year segments, 400 years at the beginning. And that's what my conclusion was, with that the initiation, when the change of times and laws occurred, that 400 years was added, and then retrospectively at the end of the 1,000-year millennial kingdom, that 300 years was added, like Herbert Elig's phantom time hypothesis proposed. And so I think that that just, again, like you said, it just fit like a glove looking at that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think what Gunnar Heisen's also done, and I'm not as probably keen to probably necessarily trust him on everything he's done, but he went back before AD because I think his first book, I believe, was about the BC timeline being all jacked up. And I understand why he believes that. And but I was saying to Brian, and I know I spoke with you over the phone about it. I think it's really weird the way we're taught about chronology in the Bible when you have that 400-year dark period between the end of the Old Testament to the beginning of the New Testament. And then certain books are in like the Catholic canon, like Maccabees, and I think it's in the Orthodox canon, it's in the Ethiopian canon, but it's not in our current one when First Maccabees literally talks about the event that's described in Maccabees as setting up the abomination of desolation. That's in First Maccabees 1 verse 54. But I was saying I thought this was interesting to me about this is that what I found the most interesting, and I was trying to ask you what you thought it meant, but it was saying that in the abomination of desolation in Maccabees, let me see if I can find that. It was Maccabees 1, first Maccabees. Let me see. It mentions a specific year that the abomination of desolation was set up, and and of course I said my spidey sense went off because I was like, wait a minute, how could it even know when that year was? Because well, if a year was written down before the Anno Domini chronology started, it would certainly not look like Anno Domini chronology.
Right.
It would not look like they would not have called it BC. But here's what it says in this verse. It says, excuse me, on the 15th day of the month, Keslev, in the year 145, the king erected desolating abomination upon the altar of burnt offerings in the surrounding cities of Judah, and they built pagan altars. So it literally says they set up the abomination desolate, but it says the year 145. Like, what does that mean? Like, based
Yeah.
on whose calendar? Because
I don't know.
again, that would make no sense based on any kind of older calendar. And so what's interesting is that the people say that event happened in 167 BC. So about 200 years ish before, all the other things that happened. I think the question I have is what if that timeline's wrong too? What if that was you could move that up into the first century, and then we have like the literal abomination of desolation that most futurists are begging. When did that happen? Because again, I'm not saying like that. I believe all the Bible's true, but I can't vouch for the chronology I'm told fits around when the Bible was, because it's like that's actually not in the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, yeah, I think Jesus, when he talks about the abomination of desolation, wasn't talking about the past Antiochus Epiphanes, but like you said, that may be in the future that Maccabees was writing about.
Yeah, that's the thing is I was really wondering, especially in Matthew 24, when Jesus says, "When you see the abomination of desolation," and then in most Bibles there's a parentheses it says, this calls for a mind of wisdom. And I thought, what does that mean? You know what I mean? Because like in the way that we're taught about the futurism now, I don't think it calls for a mind of wisdom if we would know what the abomination of desolation was, because we're told over and over again what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a man going in there declaring himself God, putting into sacrifices. So why did Jesus say this calls for a mind of wisdom? It's almost kind of like echoes in Revelation when it's talking about the number of the beast. This calls for a mind of wisdom. Who can
Right.
calculate the number?
Yeah.
Like there's something, I don't know, it seems like there's something that we're missing. Not that the scripture's missing, but we're missing it. Like that kind of the mystery of that.
Yeah. And again, he was speaking to that generation that knew, something imminent and those judgments were coming up. So were looking for something once he said that. There were some clues there for that generation, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about a little bit. You know what? Maybe we can kind of recalibrate here. I wanted to play this video since people were asking a little bit more about the Statue of Liberty. I made this video about 3 years ago now, and it's funny because I was drawing a correlation between the Statue of Liberty and the potential release of the Antichrist. And I thought, let's just say, watch this video and maybe view it as this is talking more about the devil himself. This is not about the Antichrist. And I think it might actually fit even better than. Let me see. Yeah, it might actually fit even better. Let me see here.
Let me start with a question.
Sorry.
And I think this will be a good
Let me
segue.
start with a question. Has a hole in the ground ever been a memorial to anyone? Does that honor anyone in any way? What would be significant about a hole in the ground that would honor someone? I've got a thought. Revelation 9:11. They have his king over them, the angel of the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek he is called Apollyon, Apollo, the king of the bottomless pit, the angel of the bottomless pit. So you might honor a king of a pit, the hole, right? So how do we tie in Apollo, New York, and 9/11? Let's look. Statue of Liberty. Why, JT, that's a lady. No, it's not a.
Oh, come on. What is going on? They don't want us to show this video.
I guess not. But I get where you're going with this, and I think it's a good segue of maybe talking about the next topic if it'll continue.
Yeah, I think it's
Because that guy's talking about the Apollyon coming out of the bottomless pit during that time of the trumpet and vial judgments, whereas Satan's released from a bottomless pit for that generation that's going to be part of the little season.
right. Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
mean. It's kind of interesting. Like, yeah, the correlation here. Let's see, why is this? It's never been a problem. Obviously, JT's.
That's a lady. No, it's not a lady.
This is ridiculous here. You know what? It's just
Patience of the saints.
yeah, right. It's like it always happens when you're doing something controversial like this.
Let me start with a question.
It just buffered like crazy. I don't think that. You know what? Forget it. Forget it.
All right. Well, let's talk about this.
I'll link to the video. But the main point of it, I was showing all the images that you have. Shamash, yeah, is like an Akkadian name for Apollo. He's another sun god. And then I thought, I was making all the connections. You have even the twin towers. Apollo has a twin sister. You even have the Apollo 11 stuff, and yeah, and I was saying like, yeah, the whole thing is like why would you honor anybody with a pit? Maybe because
Right.
somebody came out of a pit.
Exactly.
And that's what I was, so of course I was saying the king of the bottomless pit, and that's why you have this hole. But what if ultimately that could also be a reference to the devil? He's out of his pit. You know,
Yes.
like we're showing it. Like literally, it's shown. Like if you go to New York City at night, you'll see like they're lit up. Like it looks like a fire dancing around the thing, and you're like, now how in the world does that honor people who supposedly died in a fire?
Right.
It's kind of re-traumatizing the people who have loved ones who passed away in those buildings. It makes no sense.
It doesn't. And again, I think the Statue of Liberty is in honor of Lucifer, of Satan. You know, the image of the beast that was set up was for the beast at that time, the Antichrist at that time that's in our past. This now in the little season, since he's been released, that is what the Statue of Liberty, that's what that pit represents. And, and we can go into, I know I rambled a while back and I was leading into a comment that a commenter had left. And he basically said, speaking of 1776, that it's no coincidence that US became a nation the same year the little season began. Like it's not a coincidence. And then he kind of linked Gog and Magog, which is going to be the end time war with that. And he linked Gog being the president of the United States, some future president of the United States during Satan's little season, with Magog being the United States and the territories that they occupy. And so that got me looking into, well, the United States of America. Where does America come from? And how do we get that name? And you know what we're told, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Actually, that hopefully this video will play. I said I pulled this one up from the archives too, but you can finish what you're going to say, and I'll try to play this other one.
Yeah, so the United States of America, they say, is named after Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian explorer in the 15th century.
Yeah,
Over
like the
200
third
years.
guy to get over here, supposedly, or something like that. They said they
Yeah,
just name it after him.
yeah. So play that video, and then I'm going to tell you what America truly means.
Okay, here we go.
Now that we know who didn't discover America, this guy right here.
My computer does not want to play my videos today. Too much stuff open.
Let's talk about who it wasn't named after. Amerigo Vespucci. Yeah, you remember that footnote in your history book that said Columbus discovered America, but they named two continents after this guy instead, Amerigo, or as his mama called him, Alberigo. Who names two continents after some guy's first name? So why did they name it that? Well, we're taught it's because this map, the 1507 Walt C. Miller map, which is the first place the New World was labeled the Americas, this combined with a letter from a Florentine bishop, a friend of Amerigo, or as his mom called him, Alberigo, gave credit to his friend for the discovery and the naming. But according to the Spanish, that might not be true, because Europeans didn't actually name America. It was already named that. The people who already lived there, who didn't think it needed to be discovered because they were already there, they called their home America, or various spellings of such. So why did they name it that? Well, it's very likely because of this. The South Americans worshipped a god called Amaru, or Amaru Ka, a feathered serpent. And Amaru Ka to the Aztecs was Quetzalcoatl. So according to Manly P. Hall, the children of the sun adored the plumed serpent, so much so they named the whole place after him. Amaru Ka literally translates into land of the plumed serpent. So no, it wasn't named after some guy. It was named after some old serpent. Now that we know who...
So the plumed serpent, huh?
Yep, Amaru Ka. They had like literally some deviation of that serpent god's name was Amaru Ka. And I'm like, I think there was even a mountain range called Amaru Ka, the Amaru Kas. And you're like, okay, so yeah, so now we're really going to try to say it was named after this other guy. I mean, I said the thing makes no sense. It never made any sense. Is that we're told, Columbus discovered America. That's what everyone says. But they named it after this other guy instead. It would make more sense if you named it Columbia or something. Like the whole thing was named Columbia. But instead they named it after him. And you guys can go look this up. Go look at the other continents. Not one of them is named after a man. So the idea they would name not one but two of them after some guy, and not after his last name, but after his first name. And also, it's not like you're sailing by yourself when you go. So yeah, in that video, there's little footnotes about Alfonso de Ojeda, who was on the boats with Amerigo. So they're sailing under the Spanish crown. Like, do you think that the Spanish are going to let the guy they pay to go name the place after them? It would be more likely they would name it after the King of Spain or something like that. They
Right.
wouldn't be naming it after the guy who got there third. I
Yeah,
mean,
we
it's
know that the Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci was not the reason that it was named that. And and I looked up Americus in Latin. And Americus and this is going to take us into another rabbit trail here. Americus in Latin means home ruler. And so I started looking at what's that mean? What's home ruler mean? So the United States of the home ruler. And if you look up home rule or house rule, it's basically a governmental agreement. And I'm just going to read, it says home rule, and this is from a government standpoint, okay? But not only think earthly, think spiritually here, okay, when I'm reading this. That home rule is granted by a higher authority and allocates some autonomy to a lower authority if that government, that lower authority's government, accepts certain conditions. And so that started me thinking, okay, was there an agreement? And then you see the Declaration of Independence, right? And this is going to lead into you talking about, maybe the little season started with a whisper
mhm.
and then later with maybe a bang. Um, I believe that possibly the Declaration of Independence was a earthly agreement of what was signed spiritually. That the Declaration of Independence, um, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are libertas, right?
Mhm.
And Madeline on Leaving Babylon was actually talking about this last night, and she said basically it's liberty from God that they were looking for. And I believe that possibly this was how the little season was initiated. Was and think about the book of Job, right? Where God allows Satan certain terms and conditions to affect his creation,
Right. Mhm.
right? But he's still authority and under rule by God. And I think that that may be how the little season began, that it was actually a spiritual agreement, and might have even occurred at that time. And I can pull up some slides looking at the let me pull up a couple of slides and share, and then I'll let you what are your are you following me along so
Yeah,
far
yeah,
with
no,
that?
no doubt about it.
Right.
Of course, I kept on thinking about like the way we're taught about, why they came over to America was like religious freedom. But I mean, of course, we're taught a certain kind of way of religious freedom. But what if it was something else? Because what I have in my research, I agreed with a lot of people who said you don't need religious freedom if you're all Christians, right? And that's what we're told they basically were. We're told like a lot of the founding fathers were deists, but still, they wouldn't needed any kind of document to say they could practice deism back then. But we're told by and large they were Christians. So a lot of people have concluded the reason they needed these certain protections is because the secret society stuff that obviously when certain churches found out there was Freemasons or there was this popping up in their towns, the Illuminati. Yeah, obviously those are the people who were being targeted, like the Templars and all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
Not practicing Christians or deists. So I think what if it is? Yeah, what if it's more about protection for practicing some kind of Luciferian type deal?
And you just think about it, that is when all the secret societies really came to fruition. That's when, again, Adam Weishaupt of Bavarian Illuminati began, and Anna Lucis, again, the year of light in opposition to Anno Domini, the year of the Lord. Basically, it was in opposition to be under God's authority and rule. And at the expiration of the little season, I think that prior to it, or after prior to the expiration of the millennial kingdom, I think that there was an agreement that was leading into the little season. And so, can you see these slides?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
seeing the Statue
All
of
right.
Liberty here.
So again, yeah, the Statue of Liberty with the chains, Lady Liberty, this duality here, 1776. You see here is a very important date. The painting of Lucifer that you see here, and then the duality again, and it's in New York Harbor. And I think that again, this is what the image of the beast looked like back over 1,000 years ago, prior to the cataclysmic judgments with the trumpet and vial judgments. But this now in New York is representing the loosing of Satan. And you can see here on a star fort,
Mm-hmm.
it was made by Frederick Auguste Bartoli, a Frenchman, Freemason, if you want to believe that. And again, just showing the imagery of this and Anno Lucis again. And there's Adam Weishaupt with the Great Seal, the back of the Great Seal. I want to talk about that for just a minute. Annuit coeptus. And that, let's see, what's that mean?
I know what the bottom part say means. It's funny. I don't know what.
New World Order is the bottom,
No,
right?
yeah,
Annuit,
Novus Order Seclorum is
yeah.
a new order of the age.
So Annuit coeptus actually means he, meaning God, has approved our undertakings. So just think about that from this context of the spiritual agreement that was basically going into effect. Again, Revelation 23 says that Satan must be loose for a little season. And so I think that possibly, this is speculation, but possibly that the agreement of the future him being released from the bottomless pit and deceiving the nations was made at that time, but the little season might not have happened at that time, and that we're actually closer than we think to the beginning of Satan's little season. And I'll stop sharing that.
Oh,
So
wait, you know what's
do
really
you
cool is
follow
we
me
just
how
hit. I
that
don't
would
know,
work?
Jason. We just hit over 1,000 people are watching right now.
Oh, nice.
That's the new standard now. That's pretty cool. I knew it would be big. Everybody's been wanting to hear
But
your presentation.
yeah, but I just think that's my latest thoughts on that, is this possible agreement that occurred at that time towards the end of the millennial kingdom, and God giving a lower authority under certain conditions, autonomy, that once he was released from the bottomless pit to fulfill prophecy, and ultimately I think to show God's power, strength, glory at the end of the little season, because we know how it's going to turn out. That is possibly a reason for having this season at all.
Yeah, no question. So I mentioned to you when we talked about it on the phone that I think it's really significant. What we have is, so even to go back to like the Amaru Ka stuff. So Amaru was the plumed serpent, and of course there's different names from him: Quetzalcoatl, Kublai Khan, and in the mythologies of this being, he wasn't literally a serpent; he was a man. But in the same way that I think that's interesting how there's obviously a serpent in the garden, there's a dragon. But when you hear about the devil, he can appear as angel of light. He appears as maybe whatever he needs to be in order to accomplish his task. But so in those mythologies, Quetzalcoatl came from a place that was flooded. Like he came from a place that, like, that's what many people believe. He was like an Atlantean or something like that. Well, I mean, some people believe it. I mean, I don't know many people, but but that's very similar in the way that, again, I quoted Manly P. Hall in that video about the origins of the name. and he also wrote this book called The New Atlantis. And the New Atlantis was going to be where America is. I think it's really interesting because yeah, like it does seem like that whole idea of Norvis Ordo Seclorum, the new order of the age. So in order for there to be a new order of the age, you had to have an older order of the age. So what was that?
Right.
Right? So if you have this new thing starting here, and this is the Great Seal of America, so it does seem like they're saying something by
Right.
saying that. Because again, as Christians, we would say, what do you mean? Like you needed to separate from Europe to get this religious freedom, but it's really, I mean, again, like if you actually even read the history we're taught about America, it's not as they say it was, right?
Yeah.
If their goal was this, well, we ain't got this. Right? You know, like, I hate to say it, hate to be
And
like the bummer here, but yeah, like we don't got what the documents say, so it must have meant something else. And I think that again, that you do kind of learn a lot from them based on their symbols.
yeah, and the symbols again, the pyramid that we see with that, he, meaning God, has approved our undertakings with annual ecliptus with the New World Order. You have 13 rows of bricks, you have 13 stars, you have 13 arrows. They will say that's for the 13 colonies, but there's some other 13s that are prominent at
Yeah,
that
there's
time,
the
right?
13, yeah, there's the 13 bloodline families
Yeah, exactly.
who, so to me that's has something to do with it. And just think about it too, like so I went to Christian schools and they used to say, "Oh, the secular people are not going to let you know that this was founded as a Christian country." Okay, just think about the Great Seal of America. Like, why does it have an Egyptian pyramid? I know that pyramids are not necessarily distinct just of Egypt, even though that's what we were taught for a long time. But it's clearly an Egyptian pyramid. Again, so what kind of vibes do you get when you read your Bible about Egypt? Egypt is the
Right.
son of Ham. Obviously they were in slavery in Egypt. It's nothing good, right? So it's almost like that they're finishing this unfinished pyramid. So like what does that mean? It's almost like, is it kind of like that God's people are going back into this bondage,
Well,
as they were when they went into Egypt back in the day?
I actually look at the pyramid on the dollar bill as the New World Order looking to the future of what they want to conquer, being New Jerusalem.
Okay.
New Jerusalem with the dimensions, it could be a cube or a pyramid, right?
Right, because it really only mentions how wide it is and how tall it is, right? So it
Right.
doesn't.
And so I think it may be showing what this little season is about for Lucifer to sit on high on the throne of God, the all seeing eye, that they say is the provincial God's eye. I think it may be Lucifer's eye on the seat of God's throne.
Yeah, that's
And
an
that's
interesting
what
idea.
ultimately their goal is, because that's what's coming down, right? Coming down is New Jerusalem. And if it is indeed in a shape of a pyramid out of the firmament coming down, then that's what they are going to be going to war against. That's their ultimate goal, is for immortality without Christ, and for Lucifer to sit on the throne of God.
Yeah, that actually does make sense. I was just wondering, just thinking to myself, is that if you do compare it a little bit toward obviously the times when God promises Abraham Canaan, but it's going to be a while, and then he basically says they're going to have to take it after going into slavery for 400 years. I wonder if that has something to do with like the little season timing. If there could be
Yeah.
anything kind of
Yeah.
a typology in that. I know some people are wondering if it could just be 250 years. You have a quarter of 1,000 years. But again, I'm not really sold on any dates particularly because they're, like because the Bible gives 1,000 years, but it doesn't say how long a little season is.
Right.
What
And
is
that's
interesting
why.
though, I have seen some stuff in the news recently, and I have to make a short video about this. But I think somebody who's kind of in that ufology type, making books and content about that. he was saying the government is floating this idea that in, I think, was it 2 or 3 years, that some mothership's going to show up here, and you're like, ooh, that's kind of spicy. Like, like I know that Vitali on our first podcast connected the idea that, yeah, if New Jerusalem shows up, would it look like a mothership? Would it look like a spaceship? And it is interesting you say that about how if New Jerusalem could be pyramid shaped, based on the dimensions. There's all those kind of people who have like the ancient astronaut theorists, obviously the reason we made Ancient Angels. They show like on their book covers and stuff like that, they show pyramids with like rockets on the bottom and they're flying.
Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah.
there is something to that. Maybe that's, I mean, I know that's really sci-fi crazy stuff, but I mean,
No, I think
we really don't know how it would like how New Jerusalem was going to show up
well,
and how it's
I
going to
think
look.
that's if we're indeed in Satan's little season, I think that's the next big event is the revealing of the camp of the saints in the beloved city. And if New Jerusalem is above in the north, in the central part of our realm, once it becomes visible, everybody's going to see it. And if it's pyramid shaped, then yeah, um, that will that will initiate the surrounding of the camp of the saints and the beloved city in preparation for war. It says Satan deceives the nation's armies that are as much as the sand of the sea. It's going to be a huge, huge event, and it could
Hmm.
be in our near future. Again, I'm not a date setter. That's why I don't say that I'm not dogmatic on 1776, but I think it's a good starting point to have this conversation because now, we see all these different things that occurred at that year or right around that year. And now possibly, that 1776 could have been towards the end of the millennial kingdom during this transition time when a spiritual agreement was made, and that it was decades later when Satan was actually loosed. Was he loosed actually in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s when we see all these reports of mud floods? Did his release caused this huge cataclysmic event? And I know you've done some videos on mud floods. I haven't researched it that much, but that would make sense of soil liquefaction with the release of a spiritual entity like Satan during the beginning of Satan's little season for that to occur. And then and because of that, using that catastrophic those events over possibly decades to wipe out the memory of the people that experienced part of the millennial kingdom.
Yeah, no question. So there was also interesting. I think I haven't done a video about this, but I'm sure if, maybe Madeline has mentioned it. I think was it in 1816 there was some kind of celestial event where the people were talking about stars falling and all that kind of stuff, like just really random crazy stuff happening. And I want to say that might have coincided with this massive earthquake that would you know what I'm talking about? I think that was like around somewhere around Kansas or something like that. There was this massive earthquake that obviously changed everything.
Yeah, I mean, the 1800s in general was just a crazy time period. Um, and so that's a possibility is that Satan's little season actually started at some point in the 1800s, and we're not 249 years away going on to the 250. And we may be under 200 years. We may just be 4 generations or so, which would be
Yeah.
enough time to deceive the nations to get to this point, but not a long time because that's one of the arguments against being in the little season is the timing. Well, a little season, how long is it? And it's twice mentioned in the book of Revelation. In Revelation 6, it's in context with the tribulation in 3.5 years. In Revelation 20, it's in context with 1,000 years. So is if it did start in 1776, would 249, 250 years be in context to 1,000? Would that be a little season? But it may actually, we're shorter than that. If, and I want to study this more about this, but, you know, If so, and if the United States is Magog and a future president of the United States is Gog, that's the battle at the end, right? When New Jerusalem, when heavenly Jerusalem, the beloved city and the camp of the saints are revealed, that's the battle that it's described as in Revelation 20, is the Gog-Magog war, right?
Hmm. Yeah. So I remember I've floated this a few times recently, just saying that it makes sense to me that if a spirit's released, it might not be as noticeable to many people. So I was saying that if you if you understand, you have like your Lester Crowleys, you have your Alice Baileys and Madame Blavatsky's, and they are continuing to talk about this new age, right? Again, very similar how you have New Order of the Age on the dollar bill. Elon Musk wears that jacket that says Norvis Ordo Seclorum on it. I think he even had something else recently where he was showing Norvis Ordo Seclorum, maybe right after Trump got elected. So there's clearly people who at least believe they have some kind of a timeline they're working with. As Christians, we really don't know because, again, like you and I will say, well, this is our best guess when these things happen. Obviously, we can't take what Gunnar Heinzen says as gospel. Because he just says you have to take 700 years out. Are you sure it's exactly 700? Could it be 720? Could it be
Right.
680? So, so we know we can't work with exact dates here. But it does make sense to me that even if those people are wrong, it doesn't mean they weren't trying to formulate some kind of a plan. Like if they believe that their Dark Lord was getting released right around 1800, let's just say that date, then maybe they were starting to make preparations for when it happened. I mean, so maybe it was kind of like the revolutions start happening in America and in Europe around this very specific time. Maybe it did have something to do with like they knew it was going to happen. They knew if they used overwhelming force, they could take over some of these Christian monarchies, push them out, push in a more secular humanist government that's literally based on Rome. I mean, because they don't. I mean, even if you believe the history and you believe that Thomas Jefferson wanted to build Washington D.C. because he wanted to look like Rome, well, that's still saying something without saying it, right?
Right.
Because I mean, they have like the symbols for like the Roman law in there. I'm not even sure what those things are called, but like they're some kind of axe looking thing. You know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about?
I know what you're talking about. I can't remember either.
But obviously, you have all the goddesses around our state capitol buildings and stuff like that, and it has something to do with Lady Justice, and this is a Roman system. So yeah, so it's clear that they pushed out like a Christian monarchies to these places, and they set up, uh, if anything, maybe more pagan style, a secular humanist style in all these countries.
Yeah.
And so
And they
maybe
had,
that was ready to go. And I think that maybe it makes sense that if you did have more of a peaceful time with the majority of people being Christian, because being accepting like the rod of iron rule by Christ, and then through the church, whether it was good or not, you could imagine these people being really caught on their heels. They weren't prepared for the overwhelming force of these wicked people who are literally willing to do whatever to take control, like burn
and
down cities and
right.
obviously throw people in insane asylums, take their kids from them.
And there might have been a heart of unbelief bigger than we know towards the end of the millennial kingdom. And they may have been in the majority. They knew exactly when the millennial kingdom was ending. They didn't want to be under God's authority any longer. And they were looking forward to the release of Satan and the light bearer. And they were going in a new direction, a new world order. That's the secret of the secret societies that have been passed along with these families. That's what Elon Musk knows. That's what the presidents of the United States that are all related, right? That's what they know. They know that the millennial kingdom is in our past and that they know they're in the little season and they're part of the cog in the wheel to get to their ultimate goals in the little season.
Yeah, correct. I know that Doc Marquis once said he was a Christian who came out of like the Illuminati, and he claimed that the reason why those people in those secret societies worshiped Lucifer because they believed he was the only God that was here. And I was thinking like that's really, really messed up. But it's like crazy like a fox, right? Like
Right.
that they made a calculated decision to go with the one who's here. And it's not like the Holy Spirit's not here. It's not like the God isn't everywhere, but it is like that they're talking about a physical manifestation of this being who's here who can give you all the things. So they have this
They
knowledge of this
trust in
being, and
him.
that's why they do what they do. It sort of makes sense. I mean, it makes sense to me that if we're the people who are supposed to walk by faith and we don't get to see our God every day, like physically. So if they are the opposite of that, it also makes sense to me that they have seen, they have heard, they do have a more tangible thing they can point at because they don't believe in things based on faith. They believe in it based on their own lust and greed.
Yeah, but they understand the Bible, they just don't believe it. We as Christians know the prophecies and how this is all going to end in Revelation 20, 21, 22. They know it too. They just don't believe it. They don't believe the Bible. And so, because they put their trust in another small g God and have now in Satan's little season, they're part of this season to get to the ultimate goals. And ultimately, I think it's going to be to seek immortality through transhumanism. And again, for Satan to acquire the throne of God. I think that is the top of the pyramid that they're shooting for, the heavenly city.
Well, you're right. It's interesting though that from what I've learned is I believe that they do believe part of the Bible, or they believe the Bible is almost like a cipher. It's like it can't really be read like we would read it. So we would just tell you, just read it. What do you think it says? Take it as literal as you can. Think about the audience that it's being written to. But basically, what the Kabbalah does is it says, oh, no, this is what it really meant. And you have to have this extra knowledge in order to understand what it's actually communicating to people. What I found really interesting was when I learned a little bit about Frankism. It's a kind of a sect of Judaism, like a completely satanic sect. So they believed based on profaning God's commandments would lead to their Messiah returning. If you really think that, like if you really think about that, that seems like the playbook they're playing with, right? Because if you really think about it, so what if they do believe that Daniel was a legit prophet? I know that they know he was. They know that they know that God's prophets were accurate, and that's how they know that they were legit. But they're still quite not seeing what what's actually there. They're seeing what they want to see. So what if they are using the book of Revelation not just to trick us, but they're using it as a way to bring about their savior? You know what I mean? Like like it sounds insane, but I think that that's what they're actually doing because like we could say that even in the future they'd say, oh, they set up a third temple in Jerusalem. It won't be for God, it'll be for the Antichrist. But based on even the futurist doctrine, they're saying, well, we'll accept that because we want Jesus to come back. So what if they're kind of thinking the same thing too? It's like we're going to do this thing that we know that God does not want, but ultimately it will bring about the return of it'll bring about the Messiah, the one that come from David, and he'll save all of us and he'll put everybody else in the world under our feet and they'll be slaves to us.
Satan knows scripture. I mean, he quotes it, he just twists it, right?
Mhm.
He uses it in a question, right? Yea, hath God said. And I think that possibly, especially, you're talking about the state of Israel that we know today that started with Christian Zionism from Darby in the early 1800s to C.I. Schofield. You know, they possibly could be using prophecy and trying to rewrite it and even doing some prophetic mimicry to bring about their goals at the same time deceiving people um, during the little season.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of really the only thing that makes sense to me at this point. It makes sense that some people believe it, and again, they know that if the reason why most people in the modern church get this wrong is because I think they do believe that the people in Israel are just practicing the old covenant still. They believe in just like the Torah and just the books
Right.
of the prophets, but they don't believe in the New Testament. But even so, they would still know that the God of the Bible is real, right? So they would still understand that if those things did happen, which they can believe that they did happen, the things that God promised were going to happen in the Old Testament, they happened. So if they're still trying to believe a more literal interpretation of when the Messiah comes and what will happen and how good it will be for them, and they'll be saved because they're children of Abraham, right? Not because they're good, but because they're children of Abraham. They're related to Israel. So therefore, regardless of how bad it gets for everyone else, they're going to come out on top. So that is literally what that Frankish idea was, is they were trying to make it so bad. Like literally they're trying to make the world so corrupt where they're forcing God's hand to come back and judge it. I mean, that's really insane, but I mean, like, okay, but it does make, like you could see a logic behind it, because otherwise, what does it mean? And I think that the interesting part is that when we spoke on the phone, I have really noticed a lot of people waking up about the establishment of Israel in 1948 and really starting to question, what does this really have anything to do with God's prophecies? Is this something that we should support? Is this what it means to bless Jacob, to bless them and basically
Right.
sign off on everything? And a lot of people are waking up and they're saying, no, no, this is not of God. And they're pointing out the receipts about, no, this comes from John Darby, this comes from C.I. Schofield, this comes from ultimately the Rothschilds, and then the Balfour Declaration and all the things that came afterwards.
Yeah, I think there is an awakening on Christian Zionism. I say on my channel, I think it's one of the top 10 deceptions during the little season is the establishment of State of Israel in 1948. The State of Israel that we know today has absolutely nothing to do with biblical prophecy. Yet we have futurists that are waiting for a third temple to be built, looking for red heifers. I look at that as almost blasphemous. Um, but that has nothing to do with biblical prophecy. That's just part of the deception.
Oh yeah, no question. That's what I said. I said you can't you can't believe that God sent his son to be the final sacrifice, the better sacrifice, and then see anything other than it being really offensive to God for them to continue to reject Jesus and then do this because Jesus was not good enough. Because again, the idea that he wasn't the Messiah they wanted, so therefore they're going to still try to bring about a better one, the one that they really wanted. To me it's like you don't see how that's wrong. And I think that's the dangerous part that puts futurists in, is because if I'm being honest, when I was talking about end times videos and I was making the spooky one saying it's all about to happen, I knew it would get really bad if they built a third temple and then the Antichrist came in. Because obviously I know the Bible says the Great Tribulation is like the worst. So I knew it would be really bad. But obviously part of me was wanting it to happen because it would lead to the return of Jesus. So like ultimately you'd go through something difficult to get the crown of life. So, but at the same time, if we're here and we believe this is just a deception, I feel like we're in a much better place to say, no, I don't want them to do that because that actually is offensive to me and it's offensive to my God. It's basically blasphemous for them to do that. And so as Christians, we definitely should not support that. It's kind of like that the futurists would say, oh, it's going to happen anyways. So secretly they're back there rooting on, oh, yes, maybe the Great Tribulation is about to start, like without understanding like what you're really advocating for or hoping for. Like it is, as you go into Amos, woe to those who desire the day of the Lord, because it's a day of darkness and not light, and calling for judgment to come here. Like we don't want, like if Jesus came to save the world and not to judge it, then if we're his representatives here, that's what we should be here for. Like, we should not be calling for judgment on places. We should be trying to make things better and trying to save places. And we should be able to point out, yeah, that's not biblical. That the children of Abraham are those who believe in God's promises. And so the ones who reject God's promises, who are ultimately Jesus, they know we can't support that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're, as children of God, the seed of promise. It's not of the flesh, it's of the spirit. Um, but what do you think about Ezekiel 38 and the Gog Magog? I've always looked at that as a dual prophecy, where Ezekiel was written in Babylonian captivity somewhere in 5 something BC.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it was a dual prophecy if you read it, looking at the judgments that were to come on the house of Israel with the Roman Empire at the second coming of Jesus Christ, the trumpet involved judgments that we read about in Revelation. But it also, I think, is a far prophecy of the end of the little season. And there's a lot of parallels between that. Have you looked at that from a little season eschatology standpoint?
So when I read through the Bible last year, I was finally kind of like starting to believe that we're in the little season. But I remember when I read the end of I got to be honest, when I read the end of Ezekiel, I was very confused because I was really trying to understand how it fits in the chronology. Yeah, the Gog Magog battle. It's really interesting. I do believe that, yeah, that's clearly talking about what's coming next for us. Even though it's a little weird that it's written back in the times of Ezekiel, because I think at one point it starts to mention like that there's these things that come out from out of the earth, and there's these travelers, and I think I've heard people interpret that as they're like spiritual entities that come out for this battle. It's like these things that come out of the earth for this battle. And it makes sense to me because if you want to take the most literal interpretation of that battle at the end, it says the armies of the sands of the sea. So it doesn't sound just like a human army. It sounds like, I mean, it also makes sense that if this is the final battle, it's all hands on deck, right?
Right.
It's people, it's beasts, it's demons, it's whatever else. It's like everybody's is coming out for this because this is the end. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you want to read any of the passages
Yeah, I was
specifically?
going to just read a few verses 7 through 9, and then maybe a few more towards the end, to just kind of and think of this from a near far prophecy, because it's written for the generations from a near standpoint that would experience the second coming of Jesus Christ and those things through the tribulation that were to come. And that's why it's written with the use of horses and spears and things like that. But again, going forward, you will see a parallel of end times. And we are after the little season, or at the end of the little season. And there's a reason that it's written this way, is because it's a dual prophecy. And we know that because Gog and Magog are referenced in Revelation 20. So God wants you to go back to read Revelation, or to read Ezekiel 38, to understand what is going on at the end, at the time of Satan's little season, when it's coming to a close. So I'll just read a few verses. 7 through 9 of Ezekiel 38. Be thou prepared. And this is the Lord through Ezekiel addressing Gog, who is over Magog the land. So Gog is the ruler, Magog the land. Be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. After many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people, against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste, but it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. Thou, speaking of God, Gog, shalt ascend and come like a storm. So possibly Gog, Satan, ascending out of the bottomless pit.
Hmm.
Thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land, thou and all thy bands, and many people with thee, just like the sands of the sea. And then going down to 14 through 16, therefore, son of man, prophecy and say unto Gog, thus saith the Lord God, in that day when my people of Israel dwell safely, shalt thou not know it? And thou shalt come from thy place out of the north part. So we start to see the
Hmm.
terminology of the north. Thou and many people with thee, all of them riding upon horses, a great company, a mighty army, like the sands of the sea. And thou shalt come up against my people of Israel as a cloud to cover the land. It shall be in the latter days. And I will bring thee against my land, that the heathen may know me when I shall be sanctified in thee, O Gog, before their eyes. And verse 17 is really interesting. Thus saith the Lord God, art thou he of whom I have spoken in old time by my servants, the prophets of Israel, which prophesied in those days many years that I would bring thee, speaking of Gog, G-O-G, against them, the servants and prophets of Israel. So with the north part, is this speaking of Gog coming against in the central realm the camp of the saints, because it's talking about that Gog in this context would be coming against the servants and prophets of Israel. Could that be the camp of the glorified saints that possibly could still be here on earth? And then finally, in verse 22 and 23 to end the chapter, and this is the result that we see in Revelation 20, after the nation's army surround the camp of the saints and the beloved city, and I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood, and I will rain upon him and upon his bands and upon the many people that are with him an overflowing rain and great hailstones, fire and brimstone. Thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord. So I think that, that ending right there may be, again, why this is all allowed to happen, and why possibly a spiritual agreement that occurred during the times in and around 1776 and occurred ultimately to show God's glory and his sanctity.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I got to be honest. Like when I read that, I'm like I could get visions also of like it having to do with Rome coming too. So it's like you have this near, it's like near far type prophecy. It's confusing. I got to be honest. I think it's what do you think? I mean obviously I think that there's a lot here, but it really is hard to apply it to now, especially hearing about horses. And somebody asked about what I was talking about with the travelers. That's actually in Ezekiel 39. And it says, and this is from the ESV. I think it says something a little different, slightly different in the KJV, but the travelers made sense to me. It says, on that day, I will give Gog a place for burial in Israel, the valley of travelers, east of the sea, and it will block the travelers, for their Gog and all his multitude will be buried, and it will be called the valley of Hamon Gog. That's sort of interesting because I think is that where Gehenna is that what it's talking about? Is Gehenna? And so if you guys aren't aware, Gehenna was like this valley where they burn their trash, and so when Jesus made reference to hell, that's what he was talking about. He was talking about this place where the worm never died and it was on fire. Now, that's not to say that that's the lake of fire. I think that's what he's talking about. I think that's where people get a little bit confused because sometimes Jesus is talking about literal judgment here on earth. Like when he's saying, I'm coming on the clouds and there's going to be judgment, he's not talking about the great white throne. He's talking about earthly judgment, like as in Sodom and Gomorrah got judged by fire from heaven. So certain people here will be judged. And then eventually we all go before the great white throne to be judged for eternity. But yeah, I think when he's talking about hell, I think he was talking about that valley
Yeah.
where people were being burned alive and everything.
So Gog and Magog, again, there's a reason that it's put in Revelation 20. God wants us to go back and look at it during that generation. of the people that are going to be living in the little season of what's to come. And I think this may be a good segue, Joe, in the last maybe 20 minutes or so
Okay.
to join hands with our futurist brethren and sisters.
Okay. Let's just send an
Um,
olive branch.
yeah, send a olive branch, because basically, if the commenter is correct in saying there's a reason that 1776 was some type of agreement or the start of the little season, it's no coincidence that the U.S. Was part of that agreement. And again, making the mention that Gog may be a president of the United States with Magog, the United States. The futurists are looking for the Antichrist, right? And every U.S. president
Right.
for the
Yep.
past 100 years has been the next Antichrist. If we're looking at it from a little season eschatology, there's going to be Satan will be revealed in some way, I think. And it could be an incarnate type or possession type of maneuver like he did with Judas. But play along with me, JT, okay?
Okay.
All right.
I can do
We're going to
that.
pretend, and again, we're not date setters, but we're going to pretend that if this is true, that President Trump, our current president, he would be Gog, United States being Magog. So let's look at President Trump for a minute, okay?
Okay.
This is just going to be a fun exercise. This is going to be a little comical, but at the same time, there may be a little truth in it. So Trump created the Space Force, right, during his first term.
That's a weird thing. I remember when I started making videos about that. I mean, I believe that was obviously being prepared before he got there. But I thought that the weirdest part about that whole story is how little of a story it was when they just created this separate, another branch of the military, and it was just like, oh, by the way, this is happening. Like, what?
Right. Yeah.
Wasn't
So
it weird? That was the weirdest part, is that it just kind of came out of nowhere, and everyone's like, Space Force, what does that even mean? And like,
right.
they're like, people are like, nobody knows. Nobody
But
really
there's a
knows what that
reason
means.
for it.
Yeah,
The
there is a
last
reason for it.
Yeah, I mean, NASA was established in 1958, and 11 years later they faked a moon landing.
Hmm. Yeah.
So with Space Force in 2020, they're going to use it for something at some point in time in the future. There's a purpose for President Trump to establish a United States Space Force. Um, Number two, he was on a show called The Apprentice.
Okay.
All right. So going back to who's he apprentice of?
Or if he's the man himself, he's looking for apprentices for him.
If we're looking at possible agreement of a higher authority accepting lower authority, then maybe he could be apprentice of who was loosed from the bottomless pit. And then, do you remember the snake speech that he did?
Yes, he was something about, like, it was kind of similar as to the analogy of like the scorpion, like the snake bites you.
Right. Yeah. Let me just read that. Just the end of it. So this is a poem that he did, and he was doing it for anti-immigration, but basically it says, now she stroked his pretty skin, speaking of the woman who took in this half-dead snake, and she kissed and held him tight, but instead of saying thanks, that snake gave her a vicious bite. I save you, cried the woman, and you've bit me, even why? The snake says, and then she said, your bite is poisonous, and now I'm going to die. Oh, shut up, silly woman, said the reptile with a grin. You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in. So that is real interesting. I was looking at it even from the woman being the woman in Revelation
No.
12 in the
Mm.
wilderness. And
Or Eve, right?
yeah, yeah. The it's just real interesting that he's saying that almost like it's first person, like he's the snake. And we talked about the flag. What was the flag? Don't tread on me.
Yeah, the Gadsden flag.
Yeah.
That it's really weird that we're told that this country was established by Christians. They have this flag that says "Don't tread on me," and it's a coiled serpent. And I think is it Luke 11:9, that says Jesus tells the disciples he's given them authority to tread on serpents and scorpions.
Right.
So, like, you literally have a flag that's from the serpent's perspective. Don't tread on me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, but Jesus said we could. So, I mean, I joked. I was just thinking like that when they, hey, check out the new flag, and it's like, wait a minute, does that represent us? I'm not a snake.
Right.
It's really weird. I mean,
It
it's
is
really
weird.
weird that that's the flag, and it is interesting that it makes sense. Is that who's the ultimate rebel? So, if this is a flag that's rebelling against the monarchy, well, who's the ultimate rebel?
Right.
The
In the
serpent,
form of a serpent. Correct.
definitely.
And he's, in his most recent speech, he speaks of a golden age of America. And you know what the golden age represents. You did that with your ancient angels going
Yeah,
back.
well, obviously, golden age. That's the way that the antediluvian age is referred to by like the Greeks,
Right.
because well, I mean, because I kind of picture it like this is like Atlantis, and you think about like again, it's mainly P. Hall's talking about this being New Atlantis. Is it there was a time when Atlantis probably was? I mean, I don't know. From our perspective, it was probably a great place when it was first established. It's got like literally god kings ruling it, and it's technologically advanced, and it's beautiful, but then it gets corrupt. So could that be symbolic of what they're talking about bringing back? We're going to do it right. I mean, because there has been so much fascination in the culture and in the West about Atlantis. Is Atlantis real? We got to
Mhm.
bring Atlantis back. What did they have? And, so that's you could see how that would be alluring to people who have very fleshly mindsets.
Yeah. But ultimately, the golden age was destroyed by a flood.
Yeah, because it was
And
actually really corrupt, and it
right.
was the worst time.
And so now, if he's bringing back a golden age of America, the home ruler, right, going back to what Americus means, then we know what's going to happen at the end in Revelation 20. It's going to be destroyed by fire. The home
Hmm.
ruler, Americus, and the armies of the nations that Satan deceives. And finally, thanks for playing along with me here.
No
Well,
problem.
there's a couple more, but I'll just do one more. What do you think about before he was president, his deadly wound being healed?
Oh, his deadly earlobe. Um, it was really weird. I mean, what's funny is that I got a lot of flack from people because at first I took it serious. Like that, I mean, I thought it looked real to me, and I thought it also makes sense that they hate him, so maybe they would take a shot at him. But then my buddy posted a video that the cameraman that got the bullet shot. Did you ever see this? The
Uh-uh.
cameraman who got the bullet shot that was like literally zinging by his head also got the picture of President Bush when he was told, the guy whispering in his ear that the planes hit the World Trade Centers in that classroom. The same
Really?
guy got both those shots. And I'm thinking like, okay, are you serious? Like,
Right.
because then we started to actually think about it, like the idea that you would get the bullet going by. I said, was he snapping pictures like like, you know what I mean? Just over,
This
like, did he
happened
cut?
at
Yeah,
that
because
one moment in
otherwise,
time.
how did he get that picture? And Brian was right. He's like, you'd have to change the lens and the foca and all that to get that to appear visible. You know what I'm saying? Because like you would have to have certain focus in order to get that. And we're like, it's so lucky that again, we don't believe in coincidences and luck like that. That
Yeah,
seems
I
too
got a funny
much.
story about that. That day, I was with a buddy of mine and our wives, and there's probably 12 of us at his lake house, and we go in the lake for a couple of hours, and we come back to the dock, and everybody's running out. President Trump's been shot. He's been shot. We go in, start looking at Fox News. We're down here in the South, Republican
Hmm.
base. My buddy's big Republican. He starts like calling people. He gets online, donates $1,000 to the Trump campaign immediately. It's just all this chaos going on. Then he's like, everybody join hands. We got to say a prayer for President Trump. And I'm like taking this all in. And I'm like, I don't even think this is real. And I'm looking at my wife and she's thinking the same thing. And so we like all hold hands. He's like, Jason, will you lead us in prayer? I'm like, man, I'm not feeling it. Can you lead us in prayer?
Yeah, I'm trying to get my bearings over here. What am I supposed to be praying for?
Right. Yeah. So
No, I
anyway,
remember that it
that's
was funny that you were on vacation because I was too, because I was like in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and I remember being like, President Trump's just been shot, and I was just like, of course, I'm just thinking like, what kind of chaos is going to ensue? Because obviously, I didn't know how bad it was or anything then, and that's when I was like taking it serious. Like I didn't know, and I saw the results.
right.
But yeah, like looking back at it now, you're like, I really don't even know. Like I have no idea what's real with these people anymore. It's somebody said it's a good show though. It's-
And he's also the father of the shot. Remember he said that?
well, that's one of those things where when I was considering like, am I going to vote this year? And I didn't, by the way, guys. But that was one of the things that really kept me from it was the fact that he didn't repent of Operation Warp Speed. Like you
Right.
know what I mean? Like all the things that he's kind of like tried to correct, like that he didn't say that was a mistake. And he's like
Exactly.
he doubled down on it. And to me, that's always been like how? I mean, because there's so many people talking about that now. And how could he say, I mean, he could even said, they told me this, and they told me if we push this, we would save this many people. Now I'm thinking I might have got tricked.
Yeah.
But he
I
doesn't
mean,
say that.
mm-mm.
So yeah, to me that's like one of the most damning things. Other than that, and obviously has connection with Netanyahu and those people who say that they're Israel.
Yes. So thanks for playing along with that at the end of the show.
Well, you know what I was thinking about during that time is that this kind of leads what I was saying about that my thought process on like maybe how the little season started. You have like a more of like a Lord of the Rings type thing where there's this looming threat, but people really don't know it's there. You only have the people who kind of are spiritually in tune, like in those movies. The elves know, and then like the wizard is kind of like he knows something's up, but he doesn't know what until he finds the ring, and then he starts to understand like what's taking place. So I was watching the prequel to that over the summertime, The Rings of Power, and so it's kind of it's a mixed bag, that show anyways. But I found it really interesting, like the Sauron character, how they show him manipulate everyone. And so like ultimately he tricks people, but he deceives them in the way that that allows them to decide what they're going to do. And so when they realize who he is and how he's manipulating them, he always says, "You made that decision. I didn't make you do anything. Like you chose that. I tried to do this and you still went this way." And I thought, wow, that it was very interesting the way it's like this seems like an actual like how I would perceive the devil to be, because he appears as like a good-looking guy, but he's not a man. And then he appears as an elf, but he's not an elf. He's actually like this black essence, and he can appear physically when he wants to. And I really started to think like, I wonder if that's real. I wonder if that's something that could really be actual real, is that we think this president, I mean, we have, since we're talking about Trump, if we believe this president is literally a man, but what if he wasn't a man? How would we really know if he was or not? And it does make sense that if the devil's not going to come out as showing himself to be what he really is, he would appear in a way that he could hide in plain sight and he
Right.
could pull the strings. I want to say that, have you ever heard those stories that of these men who just show up and like give these speeches and change the whole room? Because I want to say that there was something similar to that when the declaration or the it was somewhere around where the Declaration of Independence was being written or signed, and it's like there's this man shows up and he turns the whole room. He kind of gives like, what is it, like the like the Braveheart speech, and
Uh-huh.
everyone's, oh yeah, everyone's ready to go, and then it's like nobody know who is he was, and then he's gone. Have you ever heard that?
I haven't. I've heard of
I'll have to
Patrick
I'll have to
Henry.
try, I'll have to maybe track that information down. But yeah, there's that's an example, and there's other like key examples along of history where like there's this man, nobody knows him. He turns the room, and then it affects all of history.
Yeah,
Like, who could that man have
it
been?
could,
Like I mean, in this situation, especially
especially
talking
if it's
about
been in the last 200 years.
right, exactly. That again, if angels can show up and they can appear as normal people, it makes sense that the devil would do that
Right.
because
To
that would be
join
the
our,
best. That'd be his best way to be able to
yeah,
affect
just like
outcomes.
at the beginning of the little season, if it happened around 1776, Patrick Henry's speech, right? Give me liberty or give me death, the
Hmm.
join or die, the snake chopped up into 13 parts, that they say represent the colonies, join the colonies or die. But truly, what are we talking about here? You know?
No, I mean, there's no way to know exactly what those events. I mean, I think that like obviously the closer you get to history, like we can see a clear picture. But yeah, like without being in these people's heads and also believing, now I have to believe, based on the research we've done, is that these cities were not built by these people. I mean, that doesn't that kind of change like your perspective on the founding of this country now? Because I mean, literally, it is like these buildings were found. So I've wondered this for sure because it seems like the United States and Great Britain has still had a cozy relationship all this time. So does it make really a lot of sense that they fought this bloody Revolutionary War against them? Like,
Right.
what if the Civil War and the Revolutionary War were real wars, but what if it was against different people? What if it was like those wars were fought against different native populations that had owned those cities?
And I think it probably was. I think that was part of the American and French revolutions. Basically I say on my videos, those were Luciferian revolutions led by Washington in the West, and Napoleon reaped the benefits in the East.
Yeah, that makes sense. What if there was some kind of monarchies here that we're just not taught about? Because that's kind of what would happen all around the world. And obviously you see the buildings here. I think that might be the thing that I've been wondering, that we're taught this very specific view of how Rome was ran. And so there was an emperor, and then there was governors, and there's prefects and all these kind of people. But I think that they likely called them kings. And that's why they can manipulate the timeline and say, oh, well, this was a Roman emperor, and this was a Roman emperor, and this, and then we put them in this chronological order. So that you space them out over 1,000 years. But I think that you likely had kings over kingdoms because Rome was so massive that it could not be ruled centrally from Rome. It had to
Right.
be ruled. And so you call him whatever you want to. Even like Julius Caesar is called the dictator. So that doesn't mean he doesn't have the full authority as an emperor did. He did. So we just don't call him an emperor because that title was reserved for someone else. Which is interesting is that emperor was used supposedly by Caesar Augustus because it was a less impressive title than king, because they didn't want to have a king because they still had a republic. I don't know. I just wonder if that what is it possible you did have kings here? That's why like you see those really old maps and they actually show like castles and stuff like that.
Right. And we see the word castles in the Bible. And in Esther, that's how the ruler during that time did it. He broke up his kingdom into, I think, 80 provinces, or I may be wrong on the number, but that's how they did it back then in biblical times. Yeah,
R-
so
Right. Well, that's what I was thinking about like in the book of Revelation when it's talking about there's this beast. It's got seven heads and there's seven hills and also there's seven kings. And I was thinking like that's really I mean like we're always thinking that they're all in order, but this empire is huge, so there could be kings that are all linked up at the same time, and this is because it is a worldwide thing that's happening in the end of the book of Revelation.
right. Yeah, like the ten horns on the beast were 10 kings.
Right,
Three
so
are
they're all
fallen,
on the
right?
beast at the same time. They're not like
Exactly. So it wasn't, I don't think it was successive. I think those were 10 kings ruling different parts of the worldwide Roman Empire
Yeah, it's
under a central authority in Jerusalem.
yeah, the more you think about it, it actually does make sense that if that's how I mean, that makes sense to me, but it also makes me think like, dang, like that really trying to peel back history now because the way it's written is like somebody's best guess. And if not, an outright lie
Yeah.
to throw us. But yeah, I do wonder if that like some of the stuff might have really happened with you have like the Vatican vaults and stuff. I wonder how much of that was preserved, like this kind of knowledge we're asking questions about.
Yeah, a lot of history was rewritten, a lot was destroyed, but I think there's some secret vaults that have the truth of the past millennial kingdom actually.
Well, awesome, man. This was a great conversation. If you got anything else you want to mention before the end, we had like 1,200 people watching
Oh, that's awesome.
today.
I
I
haven't
mean,
checked the comments at all. I'm just kind of focused, listen to you, but I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a long time coming.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you guys, I'm sure a lot of people here probably already followed Jason Jack, but if you guys do not, check his channel out. I think we've been toying with the idea of maybe eventually collaborating on a few videos and stuff like that. I was trying to solicit Jason's services of like writing me maybe like an outline, and I would work with to finally make that video that I've been teasing to make a shorter, like a 20-minute ish little season video to be shown all over social media. It's just so because I really do feel like, gosh, I know I need to make that video because people misrepresent our position so much. I also think that, yeah, the more I'm hearing from you, I think that you should actually just say, at this point, we have enough here to be taken seriously as a valid eschatology. And I don't think that we are put in the position to try to debunk all the other ones. But I mean, like we need a seat at the table now, at least. We're not
Yeah, it's
heretics. We don't believe in a different gospel as the rest of the Christian churches. I think it would be great if you maybe that would be a great video I think to make just to put that out there because
yeah,
yeah, like
this
take us seriously and like we probably do need a comprehensive like or condensed way to show people this is what we believe. We don't believe we're in the new heaven and new earth. We don't believe that stuff. We're not full preterists. This is what we believe.
yes, and I think little season eschatology again is the most sound biblical way of reading biblical prophecy, and I think it is should be taught in the churches in the future, just as the other end times perspectives. This is not a theory. There's theories with, like we speculated on stuff today. There's theories within, just like there's theories in futurism. Who's the next? Who's the Antichrist? Who's this? Who's that? What's the mark of the beast going to be? Just because that's in the past. Again, we can speculate on other things and those are theories, but the eschatology in and of itself is very sound doctrine. It's no longer a theory in my eyes. It is sound eschatology.
Yeah, no question. That's what I said to the skeptics. I said, I'm sorry, you can't debunk the little season because it is biblical. You know what's not biblical is dispensationalism.
Correct.
That can be debunked based on the Bible, but you can't debunk the little season. Now, what the only thing you can really do is ask for more evidence. There's not enough reason for me to believe it. And you know what? Fine. You know, like if that's where you're at in your walk, I'm not going to try to force this down your throat. But people do need to understand that like this is a biblical thing that will happen if not already is happening. And I do think, like I said, if we're wrong, I still do think it's worth discussing. Like, what is this time supposed to be like? What is the little season supposed to be like? I want more information about it, you know. And I think that it should be at least discussed because the Antichrist, Mark of the Beast stuff is discussed as ad nauseum. So why can't we have a little more study about this? And hey, like I said, I would always I would be there. Nothing would make me happier to be wrong and get raptured today. You know, I just don't. I don't think that's going to happen, and I don't think it's because of my lack of faith in the rapture is going
Right.
to prevent that. So
Yeah.
we all hope we're wrong about that, but if we're not, we should
Yeah.
all consider that we don't want to be deceived in the time that the devil deceives everyone after the 1,000 years.
Well, I was so excited when you asked me yesterday to do an outline. I've been thinking about that all day. And
Okay.
so I want to do that because, like you said, I think that's very important to get this eschatology out of truly what it is so that people are less and less able to misrepresent it, attack it with straw mans that we see. And again, I just want to continue to, again, this eschatology has good fruit in quality and quantity. It's only growing, and I think it will only continue to do so. My channel will never like come against a preterist viewpoint or a futurist viewpoint. I'm not going to make hit videos on any of that. I think, we should show grace, show patience with others. I look at those because we both were looking at it from a future standpoint just a few years ago. I almost look at those channels now as that was me a few years ago. So you're not going to convince anybody by going and making attack videos or going on their comments and beating them over the head with this eschatology, but simply show them the validity of it, show the merit of it, and that's what I hope that my channel will continue to do, and yours and Paul's and Madeline and everybody else. I think there's more and more channels that are coming into this now, and so it's a growing community. It's only going to get bigger.
Yeah, no question about it. Yeah, I'm excited, and I think that yeah, the more we can kind of obviously bounce ideas off each other and collaborate together, the closer we're going to get to the truth. And I do believe that it's crazy to think that my first video about this stuff was only a little over a year ago. So I mean, how much we've kind of grown and this community's grown. I do think this is just again, this is like the tip of the spear. So
Hmm.
it's amazing. Also, guys, yeah. So as we wrap this up, again, if you guys have not followed Jason Jack's channel, check him out over there. Are you working on it? Do you have any videos in the future that you're getting ready to release? Or
I think we may have previewed a future one coming up soon.
okay, cool, cool. So, yeah, I know that I scheduled this for this time of day so I could try to get this in before Paul and I guess in Vitali from Alpha Talks. They're going live right out now. So obviously, maybe we warmed up the crowd. We did more than that. Maybe we set the crowd on fire. We got what 1,200 people. I mean, you
That's
guys are
awesome.
amazing. This community is amazing, and I think every time we've been doing these streams, the numbers I'm blown away with. So I mean, I think that there is a thirst for this, and obviously, guys like Jason Jack are doing the Lord's work, bringing people to at least question things that we've been taught and look through Scripture at a different lens. So I think ultimately that's what we want to say is that we believe that ultimately this is about the gospel is the most important part of our what we believe. Other than that, read your scriptures, read them, believe them, and then ask questions about things that call into question us.
Exactly. And like Joe said, everybody go join Paul now for his video. I'm gonna take a quick break and I'll see y'all there in chat.
All right. Well, appreciate you doing this, brother. And I said appreciate all you guys being here. Guys, really appreciate all the super chats, including Hey Dude who wanted to debate me. Sorry, bro. I'm not debating you. I don't even know you. But I do appreciate the super chat. And I appreciate all you guys obviously sharing memberships and all you guys have done for this community. I really appreciate your support. I love you guys. God bless. Bro, that was amazing, man. I can't believe that there was that many people watching.